And we are live. I hope people are still enjoying my 2004 rendered intro. Hello and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I'm your host, David Papiden, and this is Fermenting Opinions, the podcast in search for more palatable political ferment. This is August 23, 2022. I am joined by Mr. RJ Proie, friend of the Ferment, basically charter member of the Ferment. And we're here to have a little bit of fun, and maybe this may not be too palatable of a political ferment tonight, but it needs to be said. Very much in the vein of the episode we did earlier this year, I want to say, regarding Ben Shapiro being an idiot's vision of a smart person. Here we are to celebrate Jordan Peterson being an idiot's vision of a smart person. RJ, you created a tag group by that name. You are a founder and admin of that group. As I understand, we are up to 5,500 members, give or take, maybe a couple hundred, because Facebook's weird that way. But before we get into any of the minutia of Jordan Peterson, what was it that inspired you to make this group and use it as a tag this way?
Sure. The thing that inspired me to say that Jordan Peterson is an idiot's vision of a smart person was all of the people that I saw following Jordan Peterson, saying you need to listen to this podcast, this YouTube clip, whatever content he was creating at the time, and being like, wow, this is very unserious stuff. What he is putting out is just, I mean, it's not up to par for what you would be looking for from, like, I don't know, freshman year philosophy. And I couldn't understand how these people were so taken by it. And so that's really what the genesis was.
Okay. How long ago did you make the group? Which that may not be a fair question in relation to why you created the group, but how long has it been around, do you think? A couple years, few years?
It's a great question.
You're like, I'm not going to look it up right now. That's fine.
Yeah, feels like a long time. I would say it's probably been about 4 years. It really took off during the pandemic, though.
Yeah, well, as it will. Because people need distractions, right? The reason why I asked, because I had to go back when I was doing a little bit of research for this episode and for this show, is like, when did JP come on the scene? Like, when did he get big and famous, and why? Most anyone who knows at least something about him knows that he kind of sort of exploded onto the culture war scene around I think it was like mid to late 2016, and this was in relation to Bill C-16 that came out, and this is a Canadian law. He's a Canadian resident or citizen, worked at the University of Toronto at the time. I'm not sure if he still does, but at the time, he got real big and bad and famous for taking serious offense to Bill C-16. And the best way I can describe this is a quick breakdown. And first of all, I'm going to caveat this before I continue. There are probably thousands upon thousands of hours of people talking about Jordan Peterson and what he said about this and what he said about that. We're not here to get necessarily into any particular minutia. I want to be fair-minded here and not misrepresent him to the best of my ability, but I'm not going to get every single detail, and I'm not going to beat myself up about it. So I'm just going to just set that aside and move on to this. Speaking of tag groups, this is one that's become very, very popular and fun for me, is that conservatives base their political opinions based on loudly not understanding things. And that is my take on what happened with Bill C-16, that he acted like that this was some huge attack on free speech, that he was going to end up getting arrested and jailed. C-16, as I understand it, is an amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Bill. And the amendment was to include gender identity essentially as a protected class. That's the very broad strokes of it. And his response to this was to create a hypothetical scenario where he either intentionally or unintentionally misgendered somebody and gets like dragged off in cuffs for it by jackbooted thugs for the woke leftist, Canadian government or whatever. And he went from kind of a nobody on YouTube that had a bunch of videos and stuff like that to like raking in like I want to say it's like as a YouTube creator, like 30,000 a month, like in him just making money off of being a YouTube star now. Like
right,
that's
and you can't forget he also has a Patreon. He
oh
probably
sure.
makes in excess of $100,000 a month off that.
Yeah. So he started doing great just real fast. He came out of the scene, and then everyone found him so interesting all of a sudden because, and you can guess just by the tone of that who it was that found him interesting. And that kind of ties back into your point and purpose of the group you created. But I kind of wanted to kick it back to you a little bit and tell me, what sets him apart from Ben Shapiro? I want to ask you that because
Sure.
I hate his damn guts, Ben Shapiro. I really do. I think he's an awful human being, and what he does to society is terrible, and what he does to discourse is terrible. Jordan Peterson is not the same kind of creature, or at least not exactly. So where do you draw contrast in all this?
Right, and this relates back to, like you said, our earlier episode about Ben Shapiro is an idiot's vision of a smart person. Another Facebook group that is popular, but not as popular as the Jordan Peterson one. In my mind, Ben Shapiro is he's a pundit. He acts and feels like a pundit. He has political opinions that align with the right. He puts them out there. He created the Daily Wire, and that's what he does. He pushes right-wing ideas through his own content. I feel like Jordan Peterson is different because, first of all, he says he's not a right-winger, which is funny because he is, in the last few months, actually partnered with the Daily Wire and is now producing content for them. This was the infamous we'll see who cancels who, you woke moralists.
Oh yeah.
Which was, I mean, I'm sure that the people that like him really thought that was intense and alpha, I guess, but it was embarrassing.
We'll put a pin in that bit and maybe come back to that a little bit later.
But what Ben Shapiro does is what we've always seen pundits do. What Jordan Peterson is doing is, in my mind, more dangerous. What he's doing is acting like a self-help guru. And self-help tends to involve platitudes. It tends to involve things that are relatively, extremely low-level philosophy. If you want to improve your life, do one better thing every day, something like that, right? And he has captured the imaginations of a lot of people who are disengaged from society, who don't feel like they fit in. And I feel like he's this growing tide because I know that his viewership, the people that agree with him, have grown over the last, say, 6 or 7 years, like you pointed out. And I feel like what he's doing is more sinister because what he's doing is infiltrating people's individual lives as opposed to their simple political lives. Let's vote for X, Y, or Z. Let's go for X, Y, or Z policy. Rah, rah, my team, not their team. What Jordan Peterson is doing is connecting that in a way that is, ironically, he espouses he's not a right-wing person. All of his ideas appear to be right-wing. I haven't seen anything from him that would suggest that he is a centrist at all.
He occasionally, and this is, and again, not to delve into minutia, but occasionally will say things that are positive of somebody who's more, we'll say, liberally minded, as they're more creative and that there's space for that and things like that. And so it's because he's at one point or occasionally said something that is not raw animus towards somebody who may be on the left side of the aisle in the US anyway. That's the same thing as him being a centrist. I don't think that's accurate at all.
Well, no, I agree.
I hear you, but like I think that's where that idea comes from. So
Well, sure. No, I all that he needs to do is convince the people that are listening to him, though.
Sure.
Like, or the people who are not listening to him but might. I mean, he's not convincing the people that are in this group. So all
Yeah.
he's really trying to do is, well, first of all, make money. He's made a lot of money. As I said, his Patreon is wildly successful. His YouTube videos have millions of views. He's a popular guy.
Yeah.
It's just, what's the content behind that? And there's really not much there. And it's funny.
Go ahead.
It's funny because as a psychologist, he was pretty narrowly focused. He did a lot of work on addiction, specifically alcoholism.
Mhm.
He was cited, many times for his thoughts in different papers on those subjects,
Sure.
and he probably could have been a serious academic, and yet he found this off ramp into something that is much more lucrative, and
Sure.
that's what he's chased.
And I guess that's the question: is do you think this is like, because I have consumed, not so much recently, but I would say even since just the beginning of this year, like hours upon hours of Jordan Peterson interviews. Like I really absorbed it in an attempt to kind of have a good faith take on him. And I get the impression that he is, and it's because he gets so emotional, that he is, at least he buys it himself, at least whatever it is that he's selling, that he is a true, like someone like Shapiro, I see as someone who probably knows better. And we talked about that when we did our episode on him, that he knows better, just like, a lot of the other pundits that, who are not themselves not complete morons, that that there's at least some of this they know better, and they're playing a role, and putting on a certain public persona because that's how they make their money, and they make a lot of money. So of course they're incentivized to do so. I think Jordan Peterson, particularly because of his emotionality, and we've all seen that, that he got into the benzos and just struggles with his mental health in general. And it looks like he's falling apart. He cries all the time on his videos and presentations and things like that. You hear his voice crack, and he starts to just like, I I don't think he's acting when he does that. I think he's really genuinely overwrought. So it makes me a little bit skeptical of the idea that this is, I mean, yes, he's making his money doing that, and he wants to continue in that pop psychologist kind of vein, but like he is really truly high on his own supply at the same time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that I think there are weird divisions within that because, on the one hand, if you're Jordan Peterson and you have literally reached out to millions of different people with whatever the value of what you're saying is, doesn't really matter. I remember a recent clip of him talking about someone that said, "You literally saved my life. I would not be here today if it weren't for you." And he got
I remember
emotional
that.
about
Yeah,
that. And
sure.
and I remember thinking like, wow, that's kind of touching. I understand this. I don't really care why that person is here. I don't really care what Jordan Peterson has to say about it or what he had to say that might have kept that person here. It resonated with that person at the time of their need.
Sure.
And I can see why that would make someone emotional. However, he also recently got emotional about the idea that life is pain and that the only thing that can overcome pain is love.
It does undermine a little bit.
And it's like, okay, I understood the first part, right? I understood the first example. The second example sounds like something a child would say. And I don't know why you're crying about it, because it is not introspective, it is not deep, and it's facile. It is a nothing.
It's
banal.
incredibly so, but I think that's biographical of him. I think whenever I have heard him invoke the ideas of happiness or love, he becomes very cynical. So, well, happiness is great if you can have it. I'm not saying it's bad, which is a way of just, really just telegraphing the fact that he's a deeply unhappy human being, and he's cynical about the general concept. That's what I get from that. So when he talks about happiness and life being pain and all this stuff, I think he does feel that eminently. And to kind of touch back on an earlier point, you were talking about sort of this facile type self-help advice that he does. I came up with a much less popular group than yours a long time ago as well. It was probably a little bit after your start that I came up with. Jordan Peterson is Deepak Chopra for incels, right? These are angry, isolated young men. This is his target audience typically. People who become of a certain political bent, who feel passed over by if we want to call it just modern life. You could appeal to think if you're Jordan Peterson, the sexual revolution of the 60s and birth control, and women don't really need you anymore the way they used to. Women couldn't open a bank account in the 60s without a man co-signing. Women don't need you anymore for so many things, and so many guys have figured out that, well, no, I have to grow a personality if I want a woman to be around me, and I just can't stand this. Is my read of that.
Sure, yeah.
And so they appeal to people like Peterson who appeal to these these traditional hierarchies and paradigms as being successful, as saying, oh, we need to get back to that, and then it's all going to start working again.
Well, right, and I think that it's important to note that his whole push for hierarchy is based in scientific nothingness. I mean,
it's woo.
Yeah, right. It's the lobster thing that he has come up with. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It has been scoffed at by evolutionary biologists, by non-evolutionary biologists, by people who know how lobsters work. It's just, it's not.
Well, you don't even need to know how lobsters work to understand that observing a phenomenon in nature that is descriptive of some phenomena, the way some organism works, whatever its societal structure, whatever the hell, right? There's nothing about that. I mean, that's not any different than like social Darwinism. Just because you observe a thing doesn't mean that we should be trying to emulate whatever that thing is,
or that it is inherent. And that's his real argument, that this is inherent to the human condition, and that doesn't make any sense. This goes back to his ideas on forced monogamy, which he has actually stepped back from.
Yeah, I've heard. I can't remember the guy's name. A British podcaster, kind of an interesting guy, actually. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he basically gave an explainer of that. He's saying, well, it doesn't mean like state enforced monogamy, but like societally, pressured or encouraged monogamy, and creating social consequences for going against that, because we'll be better off, essentially.
Right, and it's not something that is feasible. I mean, that's not the most important part. Women should have bodily autonomy. That's the most important point. But the idea that it could never work, and the society in which it works is the society that he is most attempting to decry. This idea of what he calls cultural Marxism, which itself is
ill-defined.
It's not just ill-defined. I mean,
by him anyway. I mean, it's everything I don't like is is Marxism, which is the same thing as postmodernism, which is the same thing as wokeism, which is the same thing as radical leftism, which is the same thing as bad. Right? That's really what I get from all of it.
Sure, and he kind of famously got into a debate and was getting called out on this whole cultural Marxism thing. And he said that he hadn't actually read the Communist Manifesto. And it was just like
Communist Manifesto.
Anyway, right, I mean, it's just one of those things where, again, this isn't serious. It can be whatever you want it to be. If you listen to Jordan Peterson, you find something of value in there. And like I was talking about earlier, if it helps you live your life better, if it helps you, not harm yourself, that's great. Sure. That's great. But he's not a serious person. the
I'm gonna make so many fucking friends with this episode. I'm just go ahead. It's fine.
The way that he used graphics in Maps of Meaning is completely ridiculous. It's laughable. And these
it's
were
like
things
Finnegan's
where,
Wake. It's just gobbledygook.
yeah, but Finnegan's Wake
presented as you know.
But Finnegan's Wake has some cultural value. These things were just like the dragon is chaos, and it's like women. And what does that mean? And no one has any idea, because he just drew circles and arrows, and they pointed to things, and they don't represent reality. They represent something that was very much an editorial he was trying to get across to a specific group of people, which are his fan base.
Yeah.
And when he was writing Maps of Meaning, he apparently messaged his father and said something to the effect of, I have this incredible idea about the way the world works and the way that everything is intertwined, and I have a very difficult time putting it all together, but I think I'm getting there. And then he put that out, and it was, I can't say anything else about it, but it's unserious. It is gobbledygook. It is nothing. It's the ravings of someone, halfway through a dream and saying, this is what that meant to everyone in the world.
I think
I don't know how it resonates with people.
Yeah, I think it resonates pretty well with people, and I think there is a sort of like cultural despondency. There's a rejection of tradition that leaves people feeling a little bit lost about different things in their life, not having some higher purpose or what have you, because none has been handed to them essentially. And he's there basically saying, no, it's all real. Keep going. Not because it's true, but because it's useful and it's going to give you some kind of purpose with your life. And that's
sure,
and so you keep pushing for it anyway.
Right. Well, that's what he was
go into that, because I want to talk about his conversation. I think it was with Sam Harris.
That's what he was getting at with
with a lot of things. It goes off in so many friggin' directions.
Right. Yes. It's tough to keep track of, and that's why one of the funniest things about the people who follow Jordan Peterson is, generally speaking, when you critique something that Peterson said, whether it is him weeping about the idea that love can be greater than pain, or whether it is his all beef diet, they say you're taking this out of context,
right?
Which is fine, right? Because sometimes it is easy to take people out of context, especially people that have as much content as he has. But then they say you need to read these 4 books and watch these 12 hours of YouTube clips, and it's like, that's not reasonable. You can't possibly say that this the subject that I'm talking about can only be put in context if we have a year's worth of study behind it. There's just no way to do that.
I mean, that is a online debate tactic, is to try and snow somebody with so much. It's kind of like like a more modern version of a Gestalt. Like, oh, here, you want to contend with this? I'm just going to pile this mountain of shit of homework onto you. Go deal with that, and then you can get back to me, and then you can talk to me. It's just another way of dismissing somebody.
Right.
To my mind, that's all that really is.
The Gish Gallop is a good example. It is, you can't speak upon this subject until you have done X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z might as well be moving a mountain. I mean, nobody who is not already on the train wants to watch 20 hours worth of Jordan Peterson. So,
right. I mean, it's no different than if it's Jordan Peterson, or if it's Daily Wirecrafter, having a conversation with somebody online, and they're like, oh yeah, well here's this, and they link you like 5 Daily Wire videos. I'm like, no, I'm not going to sit and watch through all this. If you can't have a conversation with me, I'm not going to do it. Like,
Right.
it is the same, to keep this focused on Peterson. It's the same with him, and he always backs up, oh, I didn't really mean that, and you're taking me out of context. He doesn't have a problem taking other people out of context. When you look at his whole take about whatever the radical left is to him, and postmodernists and so on and so forth, and say, like, all the way back from this bill C-16 to pretty much any culture war issue that he has a strong opinion on. He doesn't really do much to give a fair representation. And this probably irritates me more about him and his fans almost than anything else. And because he said a point, and I actually strongly agree with it, and I brought it up in a podcast I did beginning of the year with another friend of mine. He said, you need to be able to define your opponent's position in a way and with terms that they would agree with. He was citing some philosopher who originally said this. I was like, I agree with that. I wish the hell people would try to do that more often. He doesn't really try to do that. And I don't know if I've ever seen one of his fans actually try to do this with any kind of accuracy, but it's basically just a complaint that you're not getting me right. You're taking me out of context. And it's not, it's inability to see the world existing past the end of your nose, which is another hallmark of conservatism.
Right. Yeah. And it's philosophically existential, right? It's,
yeah,
I have this experience, and therefore this experience consumes everything. And that speaks to a lot of people, apparently. But, if you're not already on board, it looks really silly. And he's very good at that.
For sure.
One of the hypocrisy, right, does not mean that you're wrong. However, the fact that one of his 12 rules for life is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And was put into a coma in Russia to get over his benzo addiction is just incredible.
It's like a chef's kiss moment of, and again, you're right. Appeal to hypocrisy is a fallacious argument. It undermines his credibility. It doesn't make him wrong, but it makes you look at him like, maybe this is not a person who should be my thought leader. I don't know if I even personally believe in those anymore, but certainly not him, and not for that reason. But I wanted to bring it back around to this whole the miscarriage. Oh, I didn't mean that, and taking me out of context. Because when I first started paying attention to Jordan Peterson, this was probably at least a few years ago, and it's back when he was kind of doing the debate circuit before the pandemic hit. And two guys that I follow, I used to be a pretty big fan of one, but interested in sort of the thoughts of both. He debated both debate conversation, we'll say, both Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty. I've seen Matt Dillahunty debate like dozens of times, both in person and online and stuff. And the way Peterson approached these conversations, it blew my mind that people took him as seriously as a philosopher as they do. Because in his first conversation with Sam Harris, and I think this is one of the things that we kind of followed in terms of prominence, the whole C-16 pontificating that he did, talking about truth and like what is truth, and they couldn't even agree on what was really true. We were talking about truth in a propositional sense, about in relation to what is an accurate reflection of external objective reality.
Right.
And he came up with a definition that was closer to this per this conversation, and this is a little bit of an old recall, but something more along the lines of it's useful and productive, or maybe makes you happy, like that. It doesn't, not true in a propositional sense, like true as in useful in a utilitarian kind of sense. And that's why he appeals to, and he does this whole melodramatic play with religion that's based on this, which is why people continue to get into this question and answer thing with him. Well, why don't you just say you're an atheist? Why don't you say you believe in God? And he plays this game where he says, well, what do you mean by believe? You don't know what you mean by believe. now I can't speak for other people, but I sure as fuck know what I mean when I say if I believe or don't believe in a God. That's regarding something specific. Yes, these terms can be used very generically, and he appeals to that all the time. But if you're saying like the God of Western theism or a God of classical theism that has these omnimax, whatever attributes, X, Y, and Z, and you lay out specifically, do you think that thing exists, or do you think it does not exist, or can you not answer the question, or you're not sure either way? And either of any of those answers are fair, but you won't do that. And I don't know how he continues to snow people with this kind of game of dodging this answer. And to me, this makes me more cynical about him, saying that he knows exactly what people mean when he says, when they say, believe or don't believe. He knows what they mean, and he's putting on these great airs so that no one can nail him down on it.
Right.
But my understanding is, again, not team atheism anymore, but I'm pretty sure he's an atheist, but he likes to appeal to these narratives as if they are true, because truth is what is useful. And he thinks that these narratives about, Christ and redemption and, the cultural appeals to this kind of hierarchy are useful. And so that's the same thing that's true to him, or close enough. Sure. Like that's the game he's playing, and it frustrates the absolute shit out of me. Sorry, I just had to get it out.
No, I do think it's funny you bring that up, because I'm pretty sure that he is trying to pass himself off as a Christian at this point.
That's yeah.
And one of the funny things that he said over the past year or so was that the Bible is the foundational Western text, and it's like.
And he said something about preconditions of intelligibility and all this other stuff, and it's like, what the?
But it was in the context. It was in the context of truth, and it was this idea, essentially, that the Bible has been around for a while, and therefore, much of its content must be true, because if it weren't, it wouldn't have been around for so long. And then he proposed that the Bible was the foundational text of Western literature, and it's like, buddy. Western literature has been around for a long time. We can look back well beyond the Bible and find things in history, written history.
But if you can say it with jazz hands, right? Right. And for people who end up watching this as MP3, if you can say it with jazz hands and it sounds clever and, ooh, I hadn't thought about it that way. He said it with so much confidence. It sounds really profound. Like I think that's what's happening to people when they listen to him say things like this that are just flatly untrue. But go ahead.
Well, right. No, but I also think that he's speaking to an audience.
Yeah.
And the people that want to hear that, it's like, oh, well, that tickles my confirmation bias. Like, that's probably right. What you're saying is incredibly deep. And he is able to roll with that because he doesn't particularly care about the intellectual value of the words that he's saying, because he is, I say that Ben Shapiro is a modern pundit.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson is a modern self-help guru, aka a crank. And as Charlie Pierce said, there has never been a better country in which to be a crank than America. So he found his audience, he figured out how to speak to them, and he continues to do that. Like that's what he does. That's his shtick now.
Yeah. It's sad and aggravating at the same time. There's, again, not everything he says is horrible and wrong. We've evoked several times, treating yourself as someone, you should be, I can't remember exact verbiage, but like someone you're responsible for, clean your room, stand up straight, take care of yourself, look after your own well-being, right? There's nothing wrong with any of this kind of, it's just not that profound. It is a sad indictment of our society that people are that, right. And again, not of anyone in particular, but of our society, that there are that many people that are that low, that this is actually, that these are inspiring words for. And I think that, and I am not the first person to have this kind of take, but not only in the self-help sense, but also from the philosophical side of things, the fact that he is considered by some one of the most prominent or the most prominent philosophers in the West right now is an indictment of the status of philosophy in the West. Like, if he's the best we've got
but he's not
counted
see,
amongst
that's the
them.
thing. He's not. And every time that he goes up against someone with any level of seriousness, he's embarrassed. Now, his fan base.
He embarrassed himself with like Zizek. Like,
yeah, no. I mean, with
I'm probably saying his
Zizek,
name wrong.
that was with Zizek was where he admitted he had never read the Communist Manifesto, and that he only skimmed over it in preparation for that debate.
Yeah, and further, go ahead.
For someone who uses the term cultural Marxism, like, that's not great, man. Like, that doesn't speak very well to anything that you're saying being taken seriously. But I did want to do something real fast here.
Sure.
Since you were sort of touching on a few of them. Here are the 12 rules of Jordan Peterson from his mega bestseller hit, 12 Rules for Life. 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Okay. 2, treat yourself like you are someone you are responsible for helping.
That's the one. Yep.
3, make friends with people who want the best for you. 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, which is kind of screwed up, but we can talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, that's... See, but that's I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go.
But this is how you transition from, okay, yeah, like almost like duh, to, okay, that's not terrible, to wait, hang on. And it just slid right in, didn't it? For most people, if you're already following along, nodding your head, and then he says this next thing, you're just going to keep nodding your head. And you go, what? Right. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Like, they're not their own people and they're there to please you as a human being or something? Like,
sure.
Whoa.
Well, it also is ironically incredibly conservative, right? It's, don't let your children do anything outside of the box that you've created. And
exactly,
it fits very well with his vociferous anti-trans, stance that he's taken, including getting kicked off Twitter for dead naming Elliot Page. But you don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Like, it sounds almost sinister if you take it by itself. However, going on, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. Be precise in your speech, which I love, and I'm about to go back to.
It's what we were talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Okay, so 11 and 12 are throwaways.
Yeah, I'm allergic to cats. I'm not going to pet them.
That's fine. But be precise in your speech is just such an amazing thing for someone who championed this anti-C16 stance. Like, be precise in your speech.
When you're talking about me.
Right.
I think that's what he meant.
But when you're talking about someone else, you do whatever it is that you think is true. And
any kind of canard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's funny, and I use this example. He objects to the idea of calling a trans person they, them, or maybe even a not trans person. It doesn't matter. A person who wishes to be called they, them by those pronouns. He objects to that. He says that's not a biological truth. Now, putting aside the fact that biological sex and gender are different things, and
which, I mean, again, going back to that other tag group about basing your ideology on probably not understanding things. I mean, that's where we are,
Right, but they're separate things. There is no way that, and his example back then, because he was an actual professor who was teaching classes at the time, was that he wouldn't call a person who asked to be called by pronouns that didn't match up with what he thought the pronouns should be by the pronouns that were chosen. But I guarantee you, through the years of his teaching, that he called people by nicknames or middle names or whatever it was that they preferred to be referred to, even though that wasn't the truth of what was on their birth certificate. And it's just
So you're
such-
saying that nickname isn't a biological truth and that he
Right.
should therefore reject it?
right. I mean, if
So
you're
if
going
I want to
be,
go by Dave, that's not a biological truth. I understand.
Exactly.
Okay. That's good to know. I have to be David. It's biological.
right,
Okay.
and he wants you to be precise in your speech. And I think that he would argue that his take on particularly trans people, because that's really what his aim is. He's not trying to take this out on, Steven who wants to go by Steve, but the precision in speech that he's looking for is this old school hierarchical order of you have to do what I say. You don't get to define your own reality. And the idea that that is precision in speech is laughable. It's just
it's
bad philosophy.
yeah, it's incredibly bad philosophy. Go back to the earlier point, but yeah,
unless the philosophy is just pure existentialism, which
I'm not willing to give him that much credit, honestly.
No,
because
but I'm saying he
the
doesn't
whole
espouse
trans hate thing is like he's in lockstep, more or less, from what I can tell, with Ben Shapiro and so many of those pundits on the right, who this is their hobby horse. They can pick on trans people. Look, they even got Dave Chappelle to do it. So he's on our side now. So anybody who has a joke or something negative to say about trans or non-binary people, like they're the good guys now. And you're oppressing us with your non-biological truths, and you're just being hateful and mean and kicking us off of Twitter and attacking our free speech, and we're so persecuted.
And that's
it's all of that.
And that's where the Up Yours Woke Moralists video came from. And it's just nonsense. Up Yours Woke Moralists, you want me to, I don't even acknowledge your existence? That's
something.
I mean, that's not a great take, man.
No, but I mean, this is the hobby, and the way I look at it. If you look at the timeline of what's been socially acceptable in the last 100 years in this country, it used to be fine to tell jokes about Black people, jokes about Latino people. You could do all that, all the racist stuff. That was great and fine. Now the Overton window has moved. Well, you could still pick on gay people. You could still pick on people with intellectual disabilities. They still struggle with that one, from what I've seen. But that window's moving. What's left and what they're pushing back against is the idea is now you can't really do that to trans non-binary people either. It's all wrong for basically the same underlying philosophical reason of why it's immoral to be cruel to somebody based on some inherent characteristic of theirs.
Right. And
you shouldn't do it, but here you are. You're not going to be the boss of me.
Sure,
and that's all it is. I don't think there's anything more intellectually serious going on.
I think that the problem with the conservative mindset on this, which is absolutely Peterson's bent, is in the conservative mindset, there is a pie of influence, like a baked pie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has their own pieces of the pie that represent their influence. So if trans people are able to live, and not be harassed, beaten to death, that takes away from some other piece of that pie, because there is a finite amount of pie and it has to be doled out some way. So if the trans people are going to be able to live a life of dignity, it's got to take away from some other piece of the pie. And generally speaking, they assume that comes from the white male landowning class, to put it in the most broad
the
sense.
hetero, the traditionalist. I
Yeah.
wrote down in parentheses. I was taking notes on his work
Yeah.
on some of his the hetero patriarchy. Like it's it's that the traditional
it's
family
traditionalism,
unit,
right?
Yeah,
And that's nonsense. You can acknowledge someone's existence. You can say, hey, you know what? We're going to give a protection to this historically oppressed group without taking anything away from anyone else. The only thing that you end up taking away, and I will say, technically, you're taking something away. It's like when slavery was abolished. You took away from certain, mostly Southern white
Are you
men.
talking about white privilege, which Jordan Peterson also says isn't a thing?
Well, no, but forget white privilege. Like,
Okay,
it's easier to think about it this way. When we took away slavery, we took away the right. It was the right of white landowning males, certain white landowning males, to own other people. That was a positive development.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anyone who would say that isn't a positive development. None of the pie.
Their great grandchildren, probably.
Right. None of the pie.
I've met a few.
None of the pie stopped existing at that point. Nothing was really removed from that group of white landowning males. And that's why the metaphor, the conservative metaphor of the pie, is so stupid. It's ethereal. Yeah. We all have inherent rights. We all have our own thoughts and feelings about the world. And we should be allowed to, live our own lives and live our own truths. In doing so, we're not taking anything from anyone else. And one of the things that I think is dangerous about Jordan Peterson is that what he's espousing is literally that if we acknowledge trans people, if we say the patriarchy is a bad thing, or even acknowledge its existence, because he's kind of wish-washy on that. I think he thinks it doesn't exist, but I'm not sure. That
I don't think he would acknowledge that it's would or should be called the patriarchy. I think that he appeals to these historical meta narratives, which are the same thing semantically, but he would just characterize them differently. But go ahead.
In his mind, if you take that away, you have taken something away from those people being the privileged people in that group. But you're not really taking anything away from them. Nothing has been removed from them. They are still able to live their lives. They're still able to do their thing. You can give things to people without taking from someone else, especially when we're talking about things like rights. And that's where I find Jordan Peterson particularly irritating and dangerous, because what he's trying to do is say trans people need to exist where they do in his own mindset of hierarchy. And if they don't, someone's going to lose, and it might be you.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. And for all of his, animus towards, left-wing identity politics, I mean, this is exactly what identity politics looks like. It's saying we are this subsection of the population that are being put upon by these other, like with the whole pie metaphor, like we're being put upon in this kind of way. If these other people gain more power, prominence, equality, whatever you want to call it, that we're going to end up losing something as a result by not being above them, essentially. That we're losing relevance, and you've seen the memes and jokes about that. That basically white dudes are, they're most angry about the idea that society and culture doesn't focus on them as the pinnacle anymore, and that this is some great loss or something. Like, no, it just moves on. Like you don't own culture. You don't get to control it. It's not how it works. But yeah. So yeah, I'm waiting on the angry phone calls about this one. But
no, I mean,
I don't think I said anything. I mean, I'm trying to be charitable. There's not everything I'm going to be charitable about because I just don't have it in me. I try to be fair and not misrepresent anything that he has said or professed.
Well, yeah, but you can't not misrepresent.
Oh, I
things that he
know.
said because
I
he
know
said
we'll hear it
so
anyway.
many things. But anyway, I think the important part is we have a Facebook group. It's called Jordan Peterson is an Idiot's Vision of a Smart Person.
Beautiful.
It has a little over 5,500 people in it. I love watching the way that people interact in it. I especially love when we get trolls in there because I just kick them out.
That's
and
why.
then we
Okay,
laugh.
this is why I tagged the group. By the way, and then we'll end here on a fun note. So I tag the group all the time. I actually recently got thrown out of a group for tagging it because one of the admins was a JP fan, and he felt that my using the tag was the equivalent of calling him an idiot, which it was, I guess. But like, I was like, yeah, I didn't come up with it. But if you really have a problem, you feel free to join the group. And you can argue with the people there. We'll all have a good. You might not have a good time, but we'll all have a good time. So there's that. So I do enjoy tagging it. Like you said, the group's grown quite a good bit. Please don't forget about the Ben Shapiro's and Idiot's Vision of a Smart Person group was
and our
quite
new.
I know. There you go. I teed you up. Do it.
Our new group, Elon Musk is an idiot's vision of a smart person. People asked me for a couple years to create this group. I resisted because honestly, I never thought that Elon Musk was enough of that personality.
Was it the Twitter thing that pushed you over?
No. The Twitter thing was definitely there. It was the fact that he stopped acting like a weird Kurzweil sort of I'm a futurist and that's what I care about, and started acting like I'm going to influence the things that are happening now because I happen to have the ability to influence them. And that because remember, these groups aren't actually about the people in the title. I don't think Ben Shapiro is stupid. He graduated from Harvard Law.
Yeah, I don't think he is.
I don't think Jordan Peterson was stupid because he's a PhD, right?
Yeah.
And I think that he probably has some intellectual capacity left. I mean,
not everything he says is terrible. Like it's really not.
He says some really stupid stuff, but he's probably not an idiot.
But his non-terrible things don't cancel out the terrible things that he has said.
Sure, but even if they're terrible, like I don't think he's a stupid person.
Sure.
Elon Musk, I certainly don't think is stupid. I think he's immensely privileged, more so than the other two by far, both with where he is in society now and where he started. But the new group, Elon Musk is an idiot's vision of a smart person, is really more about just laughing at these Elon Musk fanboys who think that we're going to go terraform Mars in 5 years, and like no, we're not going to.
We're gonna end up doing an episode on Elon as well. I'm sure because I almost want to get into it, but I'm not. We'll save that one.
Yeah, going back to the subject of tonight, Jordan Peterson is an idiot's vision of a smart person. It has little to do with Jordan Peterson. In my mind, it has a little bit to do with Jordan Peterson, but really it has to do with the people who follow him. The people who follow Jordan Peterson tend to be just like gaping acolytes. And they're the people who say you need to watch the 20 hours of Jordan Peterson's YouTube. You need to read all of these books. You're taking him out of context. He's got lots of very interesting things to say. And I have always found, whenever I've looked deeper, because I'm not going to go watch 20 hours of Jordan Peterson, that there is nothing deeper there.
I have, and you're really not missing anything.
He's a self-help guru. Now, I do want to give a shout out here before we finish. This is good timing. Just a couple weeks ago, some more news. That's some more news on YouTube, affectionately known as Cody Shody, did an excellent takedown of Jordan Peterson. The running joke is that it's a short video. It's almost 3 hours long, and it goes over a lot of his career. It goes over a lot of the things that he has said that are objectionable, that are flat out wrong, and it is very funny. So if you haven't seen it yet, if you have 3 hours, you should watch it. It's really good.
I will look it up. I will attach it to the show notes so people can peruse that at their pleasure. RJ, thank you so much for joining me for this one.
Thanks, David.
This is a fun one. I've had a hell of a week of ups and downs and needed to just kind of vent and have a little bit of fun. So I enjoyed this a lot. I may not enjoy the phone calls that I get soon about them, but that's okay. I'll just reference people to watch the show because I think we laid ourselves out pretty well and fairly concise here. Always enjoy it. Always a pleasure. I don't know. We're going to do another show, a live show again, but we do like panel show, live discussions with people who are watching this, wherever interested in participating, and just social commentary of the politics of the day. Feel free to join us. Reach out. People hit me up just on Facebook Messenger, wanting to know my thoughts on certain things. And, hey, put them out there. Come on camera. It's not that hard. We're doing it clearly. But if you want to see more of Fermenting Opinions, especially for those of you in the Jordan Peterson group, please check us out on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and this will eventually end up on iTunes on the RSS feed as Fermenting Opinions. I'll also go to fermentingopinions.com. RJ, you're not doing your job. You're supposed to spin the cup. Do you have it in front of you?
I don't have the cup.
No, it's okay. I got the logo in the corner on StreamYard. It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, please check us out there. We're going to keep going with this stuff. It sounds like Elon Musk is probably going to be next on the hit list. But in the meantime, RJ, again, thank you for your time. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you.
And I'm David Papiden. This is Fermenting Opinions, and we'll see you next time.